Thank you all for coming. We have a few more people about to enter, but I just wanted to introduce the program and explain where you can find restrooms and things like that. My name is Christy Bryant. I work here at the library, and oops, I'm sorry, I'm hearing a little feedback. I was going to try to adjust it, but I can't. Anyway, I'm the programming librarian here at the library. We're glad to see you here. I'm sorry we couldn't be here for the previous two, but we're glad to see you here today. If you're looking for a restroom, head back through the double doors, turn to the left, and you will find those there, as well as a water cooler, although there is water and other refreshments on the table, so help yourself. If you haven't already silenced your cell phone, could you please do that? And if you need to make a hasty exit because of an emergency, there are doors in the corners, as well as the door you came in. So use any of those. Do not go that way. That will just take you back into the library. With all of that said, I'm going to turn it over to Jerry Ann Bogus, who is the Executive Director of the Black Heritage Trail.
Thank you so much, Christy. I can't believe it's 4 weeks already. It's like we plan a whole year for these and they're done in a minute like that. So welcome, everybody. I'm glad we're able to do at least this one in person, because we find out that in person it's different. It gets more emotional than when we're online, which gets very intellectual. Not that we don't have some great intellectuals with us today to have our discussion. So thank you for joining us, and I have to thank our sponsors. I want to thank our volunteers who were working with us: Shelley Hatch, Linda Cunningham, Jean Steele, Carl Steele, and our programming committee that work with us all year long, Ann Romney, and I don't think anybody else is here from, oh, sorry. Can you all just smile and wave? Thank you. And our sponsors who make this program possible. We like to keep our speaking programs or panelists free and open to the public, because education is one of our main goals, and we are able to do this through the New Hampshire Humanities, Kennebunk Savings Bank, Wentworth Douglas Hospital, New Hampshire Center for Justice and Equity, Shaheen and Finney, I always mix those two, Shaheen and Gordon, TCS of America, and the Spice and Tea Exchange. They make it possible for us, so we thank them. This year, our conversation has been guided by Sun Tzu's The Art of War, beginning with an exploration of African-American cosmology, where we learn that conflict is part of the human condition, and our daily challenge is learning how to navigate it. We have a lot of challenges we're navigating right now. Our second talk featured a descendant of the Tuskegee Airmen, reminding us of our profound loss when these vital stories get untold and are erased. Our third session brought the discussion closer to home, examining how the military diversified New Hampshire and provided economic opportunities for communities of color. Today, we'll focus on African-American protest movement, past and present, looking at nonviolence and self-determination as cornerstones of resilience and progress. Our panelists will explore the current state of these movements, emphasizing the spiritual strength, unity, and sense of community that have shaped and continue to shape African-American experience. Thank you for joining us for this closing conversation and for being part of this series. In September, we're taking 2 of the talks on the road. We'll be in Manchester and Warner, so we're looking forward to that expansion of our program. So I hope we continue to learn together, learn from each other, and keep these important conversations going. And without much ado, I'll pass it over to our moderator, Mr. Zipkoff. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry Ann. Welcome, everybody, on this comparatively balmy day in New Hampshire. Um, so you all have the program, so you can see the full bios of each of our esteemed presenters today. I'll just introduce them very briefly. We have Dr. Noel Trent, President and CEO of the Museum of African American History, Boston, Nantucket. On Zoom, we have Lamerchi Frazier, who is Executive Director of Creative Strategic Planning for Spoke Arts. Next, we have Richard Josie, founder and principal consultant of Collective Journeys, LLC. And finally, we have Ebony J.J. Curry, senior reporter for the Michigan Chronicle. So I'm pleased to welcome all of them and excited to hear what they have to say. The title of our panel, which is the fourth and the final, is that right? Yep. Right, in Portsmouth. Title of our panel is Eyes on the Prize, Protests, Movements, and the Road Ahead. And I get a little bit wobbly when I think about our nation's road ahead, of course. Seems to be a stony one at the least right now. A quick word about me. I'm a professor of history at UNH, where I teach mostly about the history of the Civil Rights Movement and African American history. And I've written a few books on the subject. So let's see, what else? So the order of events will be, Lamerchi will be speaking first via Zoom, and then Ebony second, Richard third, and Dr. Trent after that. After the four of them have time to offer their thoughts, I'll ask a couple questions of the panel, and then after that, we'll be opening up Q&A to the audience. So without further ado, here's Lamerchi Frazier.
Thank you so much. I hope you can hear me now. Please let me know if you could raise your hand so that I know that you can hear me. Okay. I just want to thank the Black Heritage Trail in New Hampshire for affording me this opportunity to speak with you in this Tea Talk and to be joined by such a distinguished panel of presenters is my honor. So I want to begin this talk with you saying that as we look forward with our eyes on the prize, and I am imagining freedom. I remember, I reclaim, I restore, and reimagine. And why do I have to do that is my question. Why are we on this journey? And so I have named my talk At War, Our Journey Begins. And with that, I want to then say that, I don't know why it's not advancing. Okay. That we acknowledge that we're on the lands of the traditional indigenous territory of the Abenaki nations who continue through their lineal descendants, and acknowledging that land, we recognize these and other tribes as our hosts, and we agree to be their good guest. This is particularly important to me and to our presentation here as we think about the arrival of the first Africans who landed in 1638 in Boston's harbor as a marker of the exchange of Pequot indigenous people who were exchanged in the West Indies for kidnapped Africans. And on the ship Desire, those kidnapped Africans land here in 1638 in New England. That frantic Atlantic is that carrier, and the voyage that is taken from 60 to 90 days of kidnapped Africans is what brings us to this talk and the impact of this transatlantic slave trade. As you see featured in this slide is a map of the triangular slave trade, and you see it as a space of vessels that are carrying across that Atlantic water. In the right-hand corner at the bottom, you will see a diagram of a slave ship that shows the spoon-like arrangements of African bodies. It was a part of a propaganda campaign launched by the British in the 1790s in their anti-slavery efforts to let people know what that arrangement was of Africans, and the boats that were built in places like Marlborough, Massachusetts, with a special shelf, an extra shelf on those boats to carry the Africans. As we think about that as a site of containment, almost erasure, we want to think about what were those possibilities, what were the thinking of the people who were on those waters, and how did they occupy space? What were their stories in the land and the water? And I like to think of how, in this effort of the transatlantic slave trade, that there were even Africans who were on those ships who would become, who would share their skills of boat making, ship making, and sail making, even to the end of the slave trade. So as we think about this event of the African being enslaved and brought to America, we have to think about whether this was just some coincidence that it happened. No, we know it was not. We know that it was a system that was put in place. And the first place that this is made legal in 1641 is the Massachusetts colony. We think of what happened as a result of a body of laws that were constructed from 1634 to 1641 by John Winthrop and his crew, that gave some credence to the freedom that other people would have, people who were not the African, protecting their freedoms from Articles 1 through 90. And then at 91, as you should see on the slide there shall never be any bond, slavery, villanage, or captivity amongst us, unless it be lawful captives taken in just wars, and such strangers as willingly sell themselves or are sold to us. Which makes this an absurd notion that one would sell oneself into slavery. But as we can see, that 1641 moment brings us to Massachusetts 1641, Rhode Island 1641, Connecticut 1642, New Hampshire 1645, and Maine 1650, as all participating in this legal system as they so deemed it. What happens as a result of that is the whole of the regional economies that were built around this slave trade, this burgeoning economy revolved around, as each industry in textiles, rum production, fisheries, to produce and shipbuilding, and later insurances and manufacturing, it was fueled by this human activity, this human trafficking. So when we come to understand more about the slave trade, we get to what was it really that was in place. We understand that this lucrative buying and selling of kidnapped Africans, supported by legal architecture, made slavery hereditary, permanent, and it allowed for enslavement to flourish. Senator Charles Sumner describes this as an unallowed alliance between the lords of the lash and the lords of the loom when he describes the textile industry later. What is it that is in place? We want to look at the dynamics of land and water property. The basic component that we are concerned with has to do with what was called white supremacy, but what I like to refer to it as white possessive logic that is in play, that the ownership of property is here by kidnapping and theft of lands and people, that there are those who are being dispossessed of their property, who are the indigenous people, and those who are being deemed property, Black and indigenous people. So these property relationships have a lot to do with this intentionality of how people are placed in the society. And what we are looking at here is the movement now to disrupt this kind of white possessive logic, if you will. The sense of belonging being a lot more important than the sense of it is so as I say. So the opportunity to look at sovereignty in local, nationally, and geographic space globally is our talking back to this hegemony, if you will, this hegemony of dominion, this hegemony of domination, the sway, the command, the prerogative of what white supremacy brings, the privilege, the predominance. And as we look at that, we want to look at how Africa has been read. And looking at this form that I have put together here, we look at a continuum of ugly to beautiful. And in the hegemony of white possessive logic and white supremacy, we see that ugly is deemed for the African and the terror associated with that, and that the beautiful is the European and the sublime. So as we think about this and substitute words like beauty, we can look at what is human as opposed to being subhuman and beastly. What is lawful as compared with dangerous? What is slothful as compared to productive? What is intelligent compared to unintelligent? What is literacy and illiteracy? What is creative and unimaginative? What is skilled, unskilled? What is Christian and pagan? And what is assigned to whom? So as we look at this opportunity to resist, we can look at a counter hegemony where we self-define space, where our ability to analyze our own identity and not be read by someone else into our spaces gives us an opportunity to challenge the mythological Black inferiority platform that threatens our social order even today. So what I wanted to do was look at what the beginnings of one of the components that was on that list in terms of religion and its predominance during the slave trade, the tool of Christianity being used to further indoctrinate what becomes a system of slavery, and look at how far back the beginnings, even before the 17th century, that this begins. You'll see here on the slide that I've prepared here, 1452 to 1455, Pope Nicholas V formally supports Spain and Portugal's mass kidnapping and enslaving of Africans because they felt, or they like to iterate, that it would help Christianize enslaved people. And I asked, to what end? The Roman Catholic Church has a global expansion by Portugal, Spain, and France. And these actions of the building of commercial enterprises through the triangular slave trade are also sanctioned by the church. So this sanctioning by the church of an expansion of Christianity as a tool here, though it is converting the African, it is not protecting them from the harm of what slavery brings. So by 1548, Pope Paul III used his apostolic authority to declare the slave trade legal in the eyes of the church. So we now have to ask, what is this that is so important here? We have to look at property relationships again that lead us to what is profit. So there happens in the 16th century the Protestant Reformation, and so Protestant churches began to support this same system of slavery, wholly compatible, they deem it, with Christianity. The Church of England promoted the ideology of race-based slavery. When we think about that as where we are in New England at the time, by the 1700s, especially by 1706, we have a document that's being prepared by a man whose name is Reverend Cotton Mather, who is under the instructions of the Church of England. He has the Old North Church in Boston, and he writes an essay to excite and assist the good work, the instruction of Negro servants in Christianity. And in that document, he gives this operation of the duty of the masters or the enslavers to Christianize their enslaved people, their enslaved servants, without the fear of the enslaved servant claiming, when baptized, to be free. In that doctrine, he embraces the opportunity to address enslavers and say to them in the passage of this essay that it is by law, though an enslaved person is Christianized, baptized, and may seek freedom, that surely it is the servant who will be further enslaved, further committed to that of being a servant, because it is the law that will be supreme. It is the law from which the baptism flows, that there is no such thing. What law is it that sets the baptized slave at liberty? Not the law of Christianity that allows slavery. It is Christianity that directs the slave. And so there are, through this pamphlet that you might want to read, it's totally online for you to investigate, that there are passages that read like this: servants, and he is speaking to the people of Ethiopia, who are a part of the kidnapped Africans from West Africa. Be obedient unto thy masters, as you are a servant of Christ, and knowing that whatever good thing any man does, the same shall be received of the land and the Lord. There are catechisms even in this essay that incite the enslaved congregant to profess Christianity, to learn more about being further oppressed, when you, in our terms, to recognize that there is a propensity to understand that this is happening. And so the continuance of this kind of religious instruction for the Negro is also advanced by a man whose name is Charles C. Jones, who writes for, he is a clerk of the District Court of Georgia, and he writes rules for those who are plantation enslavers to further advance the population of enslaved Negro congregants. As we go on to...
I apologize, Lamerchi. You are over time and it's time for Ebony to go.
Okay.
Thank you so much for sharing. And we're going to move on now. Apologies.
May I make just last one statement that the resistance to all of this, the liberation struggle.
Good afternoon, Portsmouth. Hoping all is well. Quick question by show of hands. How many of you have been to Detroit, Michigan or Michigan proper? Okay, nice. A few of you guys. Well, I must say this is my first time in Portsmouth, so we are all friendly strangers. I'm Ebony J.J. Curry. I'm a journalist and senior reporter for Michigan Chronicle, which is a Black-owned publication. We're all about Black press. And we're under the umbrella of Real Times Media, who is a Black-owned media company who also owns Chicago Defender, Pittsburgh Courier, Atlanta Daily World, and Michigan Chronicle as well. Today, I am honored to be here speaking about a truth that just cannot be ignored when we talk about this particular conversation. The Black press has always been the heartbeat of our movements. From abolition to the civil rights movements, from Ferguson to today's fight for voting rights, the Black press has not just reported the news, we have been the newsmakers, the strategists, and the protectors of the Black truth. This panel, Eyes on the Prize, the Black press and protest movements in the road ahead, will explore our Black media has been essential in shaping resistance, organizing our people, and ensuring our history is told by us for us. Sorry, guys. I think here we go. Uh-oh. Okay. The Black press, a legacy of resistance. Before we even get into the movements, we have to recognize one truth. The Black press was born out of necessity. In 1827, Samuel Cornish and John Westworm launched Freedom's Journal, the first Black-owned newspaper in America, stating, "We wish to plead our own case. Too long have others spoken for us." And from that moment, the Black press has been our front line of defense. Frederick Douglass's The North Star was a key weapon against slavery. Ida B. Wells used her platform in the Memphis Free Speech to expose lynching when white newspapers refused to even acknowledge it. The Chicago Defender, founded by Robert Abbott, helped spark the Great Migration by telling Black families in the South where they could find freedom and opportunity up north. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with the automobile industry, specifically in the city of Detroit. Without these voices, who would have told our stories? Who would have ensured our protests turned into progress? Mobilizing protest through information. Every successful Black movement has had the Black press at its core. During the Civil Rights Movement, the Black press published guides on safe routes to travel for freedom riders. Jet magazine published the open casket image of Emmett Till, a moment that ignited the fight for justice. The Pittsburgh Courier and the Amsterdam News gave real-time updates on boycotts, sit-ins, and legal battles. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Ruby McCullum story in Sarasota, Florida, but Zora Neale Hurston was contracted from the Pittsburgh Courier to go out and tell the story of Ruby in her latter years of her career. You should check that out if you haven't, by the way. Fast forward to today, and we see the same fight. During Ferguson and the Black Lives Matter uprisings, it was Black digital media, The Root, The Griot, Blavity, and independent Black journalists who exposed police brutality when mainstream media framed protests as riots. Without the Black press, would we have ever known about Breonna Taylor's case? Would Ahmaud Arbery's killers have been held accountable? The Black press is not just documenting history. We are part of the strategy that makes change happen. Oh, I think I'm on the wrong slide. Okay, here we are. The Black press versus psychological warfare. For centuries, the media has been used against us, labeling our leaders as radicals, our movements as riots, and our fight for justice as dangerous. In 1967, the Kerner Commission reported that white-owned newspapers had failed to report the reality of racial injustice, fueling racial tensions. COINTELPRO, the FBI program that dismantled the Black Panther Party, used the media to criminalize leaders like Huey Newton, Fred Hampton, and Angela Davis. Today, Black activists are still misrepresented in mainstream media, just like in the 60s. The The Black press fights back by telling our own truth, challenging misinformation, and amplifying the real voices of our people. History doesn't just repeat itself, it evolves. And the Black press ensures that we recognize the patterns and strategize accordingly. The same voter suppression tactics used in the 1960s, poll taxes, literacy tests, have been repackaged into modern day voter ID laws, gerrymandering, and election misinformation. The Black press has always been the watchdog, ensuring our communities stay informed and mobilized. Just this past election season in Michigan, Lansing, there was a election confusion where when it came to the Black communities, they sent election cards saying this is the date you should vote, when in actuality, that was false. And it was the Black press who caught it. Black Caucus caught us, and we were able to point them out. The surveillance and criminalization of Black leaders in the 60s under Counterpro, we see the same tactics today, from the monitoring of Black activists to how the media criminalizes protesters while excusing state violence. We all know about January 6th. The economic exploitation that led to the Montgomery Boys boycott didn't end with integration. Today, the Black press reports on environmental racism, housing discrimination, and financial inequities. Because the fight for economic justice is still ongoing. The Black press doesn't just connect the past to the present, it ensures that our people see the bigger picture and move with strategy, not just reaction. The future of the Black press. The Black press is not just about telling stories, it's about power, survival, and self-determination. In a world where misinformation is weaponized against Black communities, the Black press is one of our last lines of defense. The 2020 election showed us how digital misinformation was disproportionately used to suppress Black voters. Without Black media, how many of us would have been misled, discouraged, or outright silenced? During the COVID-19 pandemic, mainstream media failed to address how the virus disproportionately impacted Black communities. Black journalists filled that gap, ensuring our people had access to real information, not just what was convenient for mass consumption. And the fight for truth is far from over. Mainstream media has never had our best interest at heart. Look at how corporations are buying up Black-owned platforms or diluting them with whitewashed leadership. Look at how major networks give platforms to politicians and pundits who actively harm Black communities while silencing Black voices that challenge the status quo. So where do we go from here? The future of the Black press depends on action, not just awareness. Investing in independent Black-owned media, because if we don't fund our truth, we will leave it vulnerable to those who will distort it. Training the next generation of Black journalists, because if our elders didn't teach us how to fight with our words, we wouldn't be here today. And using digital platforms to preserve and amplify our history, because if we don't document our movements, the next generation will have to start from scratch. Conclusion, the Black press is the front line. This is not just about journalism. This is about our survival. If the Black press does not write our truth, who will? If we do not document our fight, who benefits? The answer is clear. Our erasure is their power. The Black press has never been just a witness to history. We have been a force within it. From the North Star calling for abolition to the Defender sparking the Great Migration, from Ebony and Jet exposing injustice to Black digital media holding police brutality accountable today, we have always been the ones telling the unfiltered, unapologetic truth. We cannot afford to be passive. We cannot wait for mainstream media to get it right. We must be the ones shaping our own narrative, securing our own future. So let me leave you with this. Support and invest in independent Black media. Challenge misinformation and propaganda, and ensure that the next generation of Black journalists knows their power. Because as history's shown us, if we don't control our story, someone else will rewrite it for us. And that is not an option. Thank you.
I get so excited when I get a mic in front of me. Peace and blessings. It's an honor to be with you all today. Richard Josie from Newport News, Virginia. And one of the things that occurred with me few years ago, especially in the realm of diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion, was that there is no standard way, that everybody does it a different way, but even more so during the COVID-19 timeframe, I, as well as everybody else, endured a lot of difficult circumstances then. And I recall at the beginning of that, I spent a lot of time looking out and seeing what was happening, and why are you doing this to me? And then I realized this power that I somehow had forgotten that I had. And so since then, I've made a very significant shift in how I think about diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion. I got to say the whole thing because DEAI seems to be a misunderstood term now, right? So belonging, because ultimately the outcome of everything that we want to do is we want to create an environment where everyone feels seen, heard, valued, not for what they bring, but for just the pure sense of who they are, right? But I also realized that belonging is difficult. I spent 6 years in Minnesota and never felt like I belonged. And then I came home and I was in the middle of a keynote presentation and realized that the reason why I didn't feel belonging, it wasn't because of anybody else. It wasn't because Chris Taylor didn't invite me to the summer cookouts, if he had them. I was worried about that. Meanwhile, I had a grill in my backyard. So I make this shift and I talk about wellness and belonging. Why? Because we are not just inheritors of a struggle. We are the architects of the future. As I go through the rest of these slides, one thing that I want you all to continue to ask yourself is the same question that a Dakota elder asked me and that I asked myself, and that is, what kind of ancestor will you be? That is the quintessential question today and tomorrow. So, there is no instance of a nation benefiting from prolonged warfare. And when I saw that, I realized that that was a really tough truth that I had to sit with, because when we look at movements for justice, they're often framed as battles, fought with courage, conviction, and resilience. But if we always at war, if we always in crisis, always reacting, what are we actually building? Maybe the bigger question is, what kind of world are we trying to create? Because movements aren't just about reacting to injustice, they're about redesigning the systems that shape our everyday lives. For me, activism isn't just about fighting against something, it's about creating something. And for me, what I want to create is a sense of belonging for everybody. I don't care who you voted for, who you didn't vote for. We need to think about a type of future where we can all coexist in a way where the babies and the ones that's coming up, that they can envision a future that maybe we didn't at some point. I spent a lot of time thinking about this, and the more I do, the more I realize that activism isn't just about fighting against something. It's about fighting for something. A space where every person is valued for who they are. And this isn't just political, it's spiritual too. Belonging isn't just about how we feel, it's about whether systems recognize our full humanity. It is a fundamental right, not just an emotional need, because people don't just want justice, they want wholeness. They want to feel safe in their own bodies, in their own communities, and in their own lives. All right. All right, well, history tells us something important. Movements don't just survive because people fight hard. It's not just that. People survive because they take care of each other. They survive because people build spaces where belonging is real, where healing is possible, where resilience is more than just pushing through exhaustion. And so the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King always comes to mind when I think about this. Most people remember Brother Martin for his speeches, his marches, and his leadership in the civil rights movement, but at the core of everything he did, his activism, his resistance, his vision was love. And I want to be clear, because I was that 10-year-old boy laying in the bedroom watching romantic comedies thinking that was what love was. That's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about the emotion. We're talking about the essence of who you are. When I say I love you, it's because the space that you create with me, you allow me to love myself. So it's not just an emotion. It's a force for change. Love has within it a redemptive power, and there is a power there that eventually transforms individuals. That's why Jesus says, love your enemies, because if you hate your enemies, you have no way to redeem or to transform your enemies. But if you hate your enemies, then you might want to think about what you think about yourself. I had to let that one go, sorry. The beloved community was never just about politics, it was about spiritual obligation to create justice rooted in love. I am honored for the first time to talk about Dr. King, but to not leave her out. Because Coretta Scott King was a monster. And I love her every time I read more about her, and I also think about the things that we don't know, because Brother Martin was assassinated, as we know. Sister Coretta carried the work forward. She didn't just continue the legacy, she expanded it. Women, if the soul of the nation is to be saved, I believe that you must become its soul. When I saw that, that spoke to me, and I'm not a woman. She understands that systems aren't the only thing holding oppression in place. Stories are too. And if we don't challenge the stories that justify oppression, the systems they uphold will never change. I also want you to know, I put two pictures up here because I just didn't want to stop with Sister Coretta after Brother Martin was killed. Because what we have to understand here is we're talking about a man that understands himself, a woman that understands herself, understands who they are independently and also who they understand together. And so when you think about a household that has that, imagine the product out of that. I do a lot of historical trauma work, and so that's my emphasis there. Sister Rosa. Most people know Sister Rosa for Parks, for refusing to give up her seat, but what they don't know is what came after. She lost her job, her family was harassed, she was essentially isolated from her own community. Each person, there's a quote that's attributed to her, and I still have not found what the actual source is, but I wanted to keep it here, that each person must live their life as a model for others. We never know who's watching us, so what are we doing with ourselves? The fight for justice came at a cost, not just to her career and her personal safety, but to her spirit. A system that demands our exhaustion is a system designed to break us. That's why prioritizing rest and healing isn't just personal. I want y'all to leave here today knowing that it's revolutionary. But Sister Parks' activism wasn't just about resistance, it was about resilience. You see the picture of her doing yoga later in life, how she embraced mindfulness, a sense of understanding how her mind can do those things. I'm gonna leave y'all with that. So what are we building? We just don't want a seat at the table. We want a new table altogether. The real work of activism isn't just about tearing down what's wrong, it's about imagining, designing, and building something better. If we don't take time to ask what are we building, we risk spending our entire lives fighting without ever arriving anywhere. If the systems we live under don't honor our rights, then our work isn't just about resistance. It's about replacement. And my man, James Baldwin, once said, to be a Negro in this country and to be relatively conscious is to be in a rage almost all the time. That kind of exhaustion is real. Everybody you see up here, and many of you all know that exhaustion. Not everything that can be faced can be changed. But nothing can be changed until it's faced. And sometimes the thing that has to be faced isn't outside of you, it's inside of you. I would say it again, but I don't have time. Movements don't just resist oppression, they challenge the stories that justify it. So your arrest is not a retreat. It is a part of the revolution. Because resilience isn't just about pushing through. It's about knowing when to pause and having grace for yourself to do it. What in the world? Oh, yeah, well. So what will we build together? Because if we're only focused on the fight, we may never get to the part where we actually build something worth sustaining. If we don't decide on that, then what do we leave for the ones that come after? Thank you.
Paul and Silas bound in jail, they had no money to pay their bail. Keep your eyes on the prize, hold on. Paul and Silas began to shout, the jail door opened and they walked out. Keep your eyes on the prize, hold on. Hold on, hold on. Keep your eyes on the prize, hold on. Thank you. So Richard and I are dear friends, and I told him I wasn't going to sing, but there are certain times when the Spirit, sometimes Bernice Johnson Reagan, reminds you that when you sing songs, you are stepping into a river, a sonic legacy, that you invoke the words, the individuals, the events, the practices in doing that. And I saw a few of you humming along, so thank you for the support. Thank you to the Black Heritage Trail for having me. I bring you greetings from the Museum of African American History, Boston and Nantucket. We are the intellectual property owners of and stewards of the Black Heritage Trail in Boston. We are indeed in challenging times. And I find myself in this moment being uniquely challenged. And thank you to my fellow presenters for the perspective that they offered. I have changed what I was going to present a number of times. So we have some slides, some of which I'll talk about, some of which I've decided to move on from that. I've had challenges in composing in this moment. Because when you feel that the very existence of your organization and the work and the legacy that you are responsible for is at stake every single day, every single moment, it is a burden that is overwhelming. It's a burden you take seriously, and it disrupts your spirit. And so I have had to find my way to work through this. And one of the ways that I have done that, more or less successfully, and it changes because things are very fluid right now, is I draw inspiration from my own institutional history and from our founder, Sue Bailey Thurman. And most people don't know about her. They don't know that she came to Boston in 1953 with her husband, Howard Thurman, who was the first Black dean of Marsh Chapel. They are leaders in this nation's interfaith movement as well as internationally. And as the civil rights movement is getting underway, she begins to look around Boston, and Boston has a lot of historic sites. I was in a meeting last week, and I said, you know, in Boston, you step on a brick, and somebody either sneezed, started something, ended something, or was inspired by something, or decided to do something else on it. I mean, it's just Boston. And she noticed that there were no Black people being documented. There also weren't any women, but it's a speech for another month. And so she began to wonder, what about this other movement that transformed this country, this abolition movement? They say Boston was the heartbeat of it in the nation, and that's, I know different people claim that, Philadelphia, New York, but I'm in Boston now, so we're gonna claim it. And she begins to walk around Beacon Hill trying to find the homes of the people who created this movement. And what ultimately happens is she creates a trail that is now known as the Black Heritage Trail, that incorporates those places and spaces that were critical to that moment. It's fairly radical, and Boston was a place in the 50s that you just didn't roll up into certain neighborhoods. So I'm pretty sure people were confused as to what she was doing. Now, my institution, I'll click through these a little quickly. We hold the Abel Smith School within our stewardship, the oldest school in the country, built in 1835 specifically for Black students. We also have in Nantucket, the Nantucket African Meeting House, built in 1825, as well as a home that was built by Seneca Boston in 1774, formerly enslaved man and Florence Higginbotham, who later became the owner and transferred the Nantucket properties to our stewardship. But essential to the story that I'm telling you is this building here, the African Meeting House of Boston, the oldest Black church in the country, built in 1806. And when you look in here, you'll see that it's fairly plain. And I imagine as Mrs. Thurman was walking around Beacon Hill, she came across it. There wasn't a whole lot of signage designating it as the African Meeting House. And you may wonder why. It was because it was a synagogue at the time. A lot of people don't know there was as many as 25 synagogues on Beacon Hill at one time. And so she goes in and says what she's interested in doing, and they say this is less than 10 years after the end of World War II. They understand the importance of markers and places and spaces, and so they allow her to come in and begin to hold programs and exhibitions in the space. And eventually the building becomes part of the meeting house. But when I look at this space, I don't think of Frederick Douglass, who spoke here in that sanctuary. I don't think of William Lloyd Garrison, who also spoke there, and who in the 1830s started the New England Anti-Slavery Society in that building. I do think of the Massachusetts Colored Association, a group of largely unknown men today, who decided that they wanted to start an organization to help them to survive this moment, to conquer the Goliath of their time, slavery, and to do something radical, recognize that Black people were not property, but they were also entitled to what we would now define as human rights. Being against slavery and being pro-human rights is not the same thing. And then I look at the floorboards in this space. I often come into the sanctuary and I wonder, am I doing enough? Is this protest, is this policy, are these gestures, is the preservation of this space enough? And the floorboards are over 200 years old. And they don't indicate to you who walked on them. But what we do know is that there were a population of people with very little disposable time and very little disposable money, because they worked in homes on the other side of Beacon Hill. They worked on the wharves and other parts of the city. But they would come to the meeting house to hear speakers. They would come to donate their time and their coins for a future they could not see, a future where slavery would no longer exist, and the color of your skin would not indicate your status in this country, and you would be truly endowed by the rights, the unalienable rights of our Creator, as Jefferson wrote but didn't necessarily believe. You know I'm right. So I draw the inspiration from this moment, and how does that pull us to today. It's very easy to say that the 19th century has very little relevance to our world today. But in November, as we were waiting for the results of the election, before we know who won, I had realized that there was a lot of noise around the election. You couldn't hardly turn on your TV without receiving so many different ads, and they were more vitriolic than they have been. And I realized there was a need for quiet. And the sanctuary is a beautiful place, and it truly is a refuge. So we opened up our doors to our neighbors and said, if you just want to come and sit, to reflect, you can sit, you can participate by writing your answers to some questions that the staff wrote. You don't even have to talk to anybody, but we are here. And that informs our work today. People do not think of historic preservation as an act of rebellion and resistance. But if we do not preserve these spaces and places of gathering, how will you know that we were here? See, the north side of Beacon Hill today is predominantly white, and people would not think that we were there. So we embrace a new anthem and campaign, which says, know history, share history, protect it. And so as we reflect on the protest movements of the past, what draws us to this moment as we are overwhelmed, frustrated, angry, upset, exhausted, sometimes all at once and sometimes numb, I call us all to reflect on what is important, to learn the history, to share those stories, and be active participants in protecting it, because these things will outlast us all, and one day people will talk about the work we've done for the future we could not see. Thank you.
Thank you all. I guess it's my turn now to ask a question of the panel. First, thank you all so much for what you had to say. I'm really glad I'm here today because, as you all say, it is a really difficult time, and so this is helping me to hear what you all have to say. I think I am going to ask a question if anyone has anything more to say specifically about what kinds of tactics or movements might work or might not work now, although I understand that what you've already said might in fact be your answer to that question. So I'm going to offer two historical side notes that what you all said made me think of, and then return to that question and see if anybody wants to add anything else. But I was looking at the photo of Rosa Parks doing yoga, which my guess is that's in Detroit.
Yeah.
Because Rosa Parks lived in Detroit longer than she lived in Montgomery. And the point of noting that is that people who protested, as you said, paid a real price. A price in terms of suffering. Rosa Parks and her husband Raymond both were forced to leave Montgomery a year after the boycott ended and to live in Detroit the rest of their life. And of course, we all know the kind of price Martin Luther King paid. But I was also thinking about King's specific tactics in terms of how he was trying to create political change, which is in Birmingham in 1963 and Selma in 1965, he had a very specific goal, which was that he wanted to use nonviolent protest and civil disobedience and try to get the images of those protesters on the national news. And it's true, he wanted to provoke a confrontation that the rest of the country couldn't look away from. He wanted the picture of Sheriff Jim Clark on the Edmund Pettus Bridge beating the protesters. He wanted that picture of Bull Connor unleashing the attack dogs and the fire hoses, and he wanted those pictures on the news because he wanted to jar the rest of the country. He wanted to force the occupants of the White House to do something, to take a stand, and they did. Finally, JFK didn't want to take a stand on civil rights. He desperately didn't want to. But King and all the people who protested with King forced him to. LBJ was slightly different. He was somewhat more open to it, but still he didn't want to do anything at the particular time that King wanted him to in terms of voting rights, and King, again, forced the issue. We all know with the current occupant of the White House, that kind of strategy is not really one that's really available to us, because in fact, he might actually be hoping for protests so that he could perhaps unleash the military on the American people or something like that, right? I mean, it's not as though, it doesn't seem as though there's going to be some awakening at the national level. So I guess my question is, do you think that we should still look to the national level and national politics for now or for the next 3 or 4 years, or is the message that a lot of you are offering is that the more important thing, or perhaps the more viable thing right now, is to look to our communities and our institutions for our strength and our ability to go on?
I'll jump in first, if you don't mind. Prior to coming to Boston, I was at the National Civil Rights Museum in Memphis, Tennessee for about 7.5 years. So this a little bit what you were talking about is not too long ago in my brain. So 2 things occurred to me as you were making your statement. The first is a quote by Frederick Douglass, which is from his West India Emancipation Day, where he says, there is no struggle, there is no progress without a struggle. The struggle may be a moral one, or it may be a physical one, and it may be both moral and physical, but it must be a struggle. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will. When we look at King, and you brought King up to 65, I like to think of the King in 67, 68, because that King is very distinct from the King that we see there. We can almost go to April 4th, 67, when he goes to Riverside and says, this nonviolent thing is a full lifestyle change, right? Like there's a different way we have to go through it. And then he spends time beginning to develop what would become known as the Poor People's Campaign, and is announced in December of 67. And then on February 2nd, 1968, 2 men, Robert Walker and Echo Cole, are tragically killed in the back of a sanitation truck in Memphis, Tennessee. And King at the time was the most hated man in America, right? But Memphis still loves him, and he's invited by Reverend James Lawson to come to Memphis. He says, this is your audience, and this is where you can start leveraging your voice around the Poor People's Campaign. And that strategy is to bring poor people, economically oppressed individuals from all over the country, so many different backgrounds, to Washington, D.C., to stay there, so that Congress every day when you had to go in and out of your offices would be confronted by this, by your constituents on your doorstep, until a change happened. And that was a radical thinking. And I think the lesson for us today is not to do exactly what they did in the 60s, right? Everybody keeps using that, well, they did this in the 60s, or we're not united as they were in the 60s. They weren't united in the 60s. They weren't united in the 1800s. There's always different voices. But what we can draw inspiration from is the idea of using your community, using the tactics of the technology at your own hands to create something. But one of the things that we forgot, and it's possibly because of what a lot of people call the Disneyfication of history, is that there is a sacrifice involved. There is a struggle. And when you watch these civil rights movies, the struggle is that montage. But if you stretch that montage out, that montage is about a year or 2 of work, of frustrations, of people burning your presses, of bills being due, of things like that. And so for us in this moment, we have to realize that this is where the rubber meets the road. And in drawing inspiration from history, it is that you cannot get weary with well-doing, that you got to do the work. Take care of yourself, but you got to do the work.
If I can,
Get up on the mic.
I think one of the things that we can do is we can reevaluate the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves on one end. I also want to suggest that maybe it's not an either or, but perhaps a both and, that it is from the inside out. It is starting with me and then with the community, moving in a direction towards the national piece. Because what I am banking on right now is that all of these folks that I keep hearing talking about Jesus and Christ, and the idea that I have to love her first before I can love her, I think what's gonna be really important is being intentional and strategic. And in thinking from the inside out. This is the same type of, flow with organizations. When I'm consulting with organizations and we got this thing going on, we need this. I was like, well, hold on. Well, before we start bringing in these communities and have these conversations, let me sit down with y'all and let's figure out what your identity is. How do you see yourself? How do you define yourself? Because if you believe that it's not possible, yeah, you're right. If you believe that it is possible, yeah, you're right. When Noel and I was talking about this presentation, we was jazzed. We was talking about a lot of, every single idea was great. And I may have sounded flip-flop because she was talking and I was like, yo, that's dope, yeah, do that. And she come over with another idea, I said, yo, I like that. And she come over with another one and we did that for like 30 minutes, right? And one of the things that was revealed to me in that moment was, one of the things I think we need to do is we need to stop thinking about the path. That there is a defined path, that all of us lock arms and we sing Kumbaya and we walk. No, all of us are on our own individual separate journeys. We converge, we diverge. The key thing is, what do we do with the time that we have together? And COVID, I think, really messed us up and put us in a very difficult situation because now it's difficult for us to even be together. I was in the house by myself 3 years. I ain't need nobody else. And now it takes a lot for me to come out and hang with y'all. Especially when I see what y'all post on Facebook. So, these are the sort of things that I think that we have to consider is what role do we have in how we see what's going on? King taught me one thing, and that is we can get beat. We can get killed. We can have all these things done. I don't fear it. I don't worry about it. What I worry about is what we do now. I'm 50 years old. I ain't gonna be here too much longer, I don't think. But for whatever time I'm here, when I leave, I got 2 grandkids. And so my thoughts right now are just not about my grandkids, but all y'all's kids. And how are we going to be thinking about take care here, so we can collectively take care of there. That's our problem now, is that there is a collective in anger, but perhaps not a collective in love. Relation, connection at a deep enough level to where when that man comes through that door with that gun, it ain't nothing for me to say, move out of the way. Right? Like that's what that's my response. Stop.
I'm going to keep mine pretty short. I know we're extremely tight on time, but I do want to leave you guys with this. During his later years, Dr. King said, have I integrated my people into a burning house? So to Dr. Trent's piggybacking off of her, when it comes to the 1960s, that wasn't easy. The path that he led wasn't easy. It's never going to be easy. It's always going to be questions of, am I doing the right thing? Am I doing enough? But I believe what's truly important, and we see that numbers simply do not lie. What's important is that we go to the polls. Now, when this past election, we saw how powerful numbers are. And we saw just how it can help and also how it can harm. It's important that we keep our eyes on the prize, which is progression, which is equality, and being able to call out all of the inequities and also being able to hold our local officials accountable. So again, I think we must have that mindset that it's never been easy and it's not gonna get easy. And to Richard's point, it's very important for us to also strategize and be very strategic in what we do too. This is serious times. This is not time just for a simple kumbaya, let's go and march. This is a time to take it to the polls. This is a time to voice. This is a time to take a stand. As my grandma say, as West girls, you either stand for something or fall for anything. So I'm gonna leave you guys with that. Stand up.
Well said.
I would like to respond here also, taking into account what Noel offered and Richard offered with respect to the spaces. I really love that Noel went into the African Meeting House as that space of sacred and divine place of gathering. As we think about what happened as a result to what I call the fight genealogies of what was pressed onto many of us during the past centuries, that this liberation theology that emerged, particularly significant here, is Caesar Nehru Paul, who gave birth to Thomas Paul, Benjamin Paul, and Nathaniel Paul, who were a part of a movement that talked about freedom. And I don't think that is ever dead, because freedom is so elusive. Freedom moves and it is not stagnant. And the opportunity that they took to look at what becomes the work of a Martin Luther King and others as that trajectory goes forward, gives us this space to stand on. And that Noel invited people into that African Meeting House to feel that, to trace that, is remarkable. And so a part of our moving forward is to look at us in global spaces as doing that same thing, and look at how this resistance to being stopped was I think, was very prominent in the 18th, 19th century. And that is something that we can hold on to and keep going with. As Richard was saying, creating is it to fight for something, and create something rather than just resist. Do something about it, do something to advance it. So I love those ideas that were espoused by the panelists to look at what we do have as resource and then to create something going forward.
Over to Michelle, I believe.
I have two comments. One is, it just is wonderful to hear this whole panel and of wonderful depth and quality. My comments have to do with letting you know that you've been heard. For Richard, who quoted Martin Luther King Jr. About redemptiveness, but in Ike's new biography, he repeatedly uses a phrase that undeserved suffering is redemptive. So it's another use of the term.
Yeah.
For Ebony Curry, you evoked a memory from too many years ago when I lived in Boston and I listened to Louis Lyons give the news. And Louis Lyons at the time was the curator of the Neiman Foundation, which invited journalists from all over the country to come and spend a year doing whatever they wanted to do.
Just a couple more statements. We need to move to the next.
Pardon me?
Just a couple more statements. We're going to move to the next.
Yeah. And what that evoked is, can the black press afford to have separation between the editorial part of the paper and the journalistic part of the paper, or is it essential?
To answer your question, when it comes to black press, I don't want it to get confused. Black press is still journalism, and journalism is being able to tell the truth, and also being able to give stats as well. So the beauty in black press is, although it's still etched in the truth and journalism, it specifically tells stories through the lens of the black community.
Thank you. When I think about the Black protest movement, I'm thinking that last week was the 60th anniversary of the assassination of Malcolm X, and I'm just wondering if of course, we hear very little about it in the press, but it has been 60 years, and I'm just wondering if anybody would want to comment on his legacy and anything that might impact us today at all.
I think for Malcolm X, yes, it was the 60th anniversary. Jean Theo Harris wrote a book, The Rebellious Mrs. Rosa Parks. And while she said she practiced more of Martin King, she felt her spirit was more aligned with Malcolm X. And I think for both men, one of the things that is important is that we move beyond the snapshots of what we think their personalities are, and that we take time to think about the breadth of their lives, the lessons they learned, and how they evolved as people, and how their opinions, their worldviews evolved in those inspired actions. None of us are required to stay in the same place that we are in this moment, and that we should continue to do that. And so I think in the moment in reflecting on Malcolm X's work, I think that's the most salient point for us as we move forward, but also to remember that nothing is gained by us being silent. And so if we should speak up, and the manner in which you do it can be like Malcolm, it could be like Martin, it could be like Rosa, it could be like Ella Baker, but speak up.
Thank you. There are things we can do today, and I think everybody in this audience is probably, hopefully, aware of the boycotts that are occurring, and also aware of what companies support DEI and which do not. Tell your neighbor, tell your friends. You as an individual can touch 1, 2, 5, 10 people and make a difference. I was in Best Buy the other day and I said to the young man, I'm here because your company supports DEI, and he had no idea what I was talking about. And I had to tell him. And he's like, oh, so speak up, talk about that. This administration is motivated by money. That's it, money. And you're right, sir. He wants us to protest in the street so he can declare martial law. Doesn't mean we shouldn't. It just means don't feed into that. Hit them economically and don't buy a Tesla. That's all I got to say.
Can I just, as you move around, the DEI piece, and I appreciate you saying that. What's not being talked about, and I want us to just draw a bit of caution, There's a lot of misinformation that's going on out there. And there's a lot of information that's coming out saying, hey, these organizations are rolling back their DEAI. I want y'all to understand, some people may say that about the Virginia Association of Museums, and I'm the director of DEAI there. But what I want to be aware of is that DEAI has always been the vehicle to something greater. So a lot of us aren't resting our hat on the DEAI. A lot of that was lip service after Minneapolis, right? And so now is a time where we're really looking to see, okay, I can look you in your eye, you with it, all right, we cool. Like, to really look at those type of relationships, but also understand that some of these places that you're being told are doing away with their DEI, they're doing away with the banner. They're not doing away with the work. And so I think it's gonna be, so as you think about this, start to dig deeper and start asking more specific questions about what are you doing to support these communities? And that's gonna help you kind of get a sense as to where they're situated. And thank you for mentioning that, because that's really important.
I'm from Arkansas, that's why I talk funny. And the Central High integration was a huge part of my life, my history growing up, even though it happened before I was born. What are some of the big moments that you look back on that happened early in your life or just before you were born that are sort of the benchmarks that you keep thinking of in terms of, here's what we had to go through, here's what we have to be prepared to do to move forward?
I can touch on, on my perspective. I'm 28 years old, and one of the moments that really stood out to me and made me realize that this is the career that I am in, is what I want to do, is Trayvon Martin. I can still see his face with Arizona and his Skittles, and just hearing, the news, some of the reporters calling him a thug, and, he was out here being a hoodlum and things like that when he was just a teenager going to the grocery store. So I think it's very important when we use this verbiage, we have to use our words very wisely. And at that moment, my dad looked at me and he said, "Baby girl, words mean things." And, to your point, sir, when it comes to journalism, words mean things. When it comes to the Black press, words mean things. And Trayvon Martin was a huge eye-opener for me at such a young age. I believe I was in middle school or something when that had happened. And it was a huge eye-opener for me when it comes to my purpose here and what I do.
Well, I'm not 28. I may look it, but I'm not. As a kid of the 80s and 90s, I don't think it was one event. I mean, you can call events to me. Rodney King, I understood what that was. There have been too many. I think what has been more salient to me is how my parents raised my sisters and I through those moments, and that they realized we were in a predominantly white environment at the time, and that we needed to have a firm identity of who we are as young Black women in this country. And so they started, my dad's a pastor, so he could do this. He started a program at church where we met once a week, and we learned about history, and we took field trips. And so I saw Underground Railroad sites, and my parents took me to retrospectives of Black artists like Henry Ossawa Tanner and August Romare Bearden, and we saw plays by August Wilson. All these things informed my identity. And so it's not just one thing for me, it's a constellation of so many things that recur within me, so that as I encounter difficult moments, any of those things in the course of that period of time will come up and remind me who I am.
I'd just like to say here that in terms of DEI and what has been what I call rhetorical kind of capsuling of what is equality, what has been the grasp of media and what they put out in terms of that, the terms that are used to describe DE and I. it has a lot to do with what are our possibilities of just understanding vocabulary, as Ebony has put forward, the opportunity to say the same things, but to say them differently, rather than fall into the rhetorical vein of what is so trendy. I think that that is our danger, and it limits us to that sound bite, instead of critically thinking through and creating a vocabulary that we can rely on to be everlasting, to go forward with, and to describe our human conditions as we've advanced. So this is an extremely important message, and thank you, Ebony, for speaking on words and their power, because we have that as resource. We have it and it moves us and it's very powerful. So I'm hoping that this generation that is coming, that is now being nurtured into the space of activism, will create and continue to rely on language as a basis of capturing where we are and where we want to go. So thank you for your comments about words.
And I'll just quickly say I had a contract with the Fort Monroe Authority in Hampton, Virginia, which is also the site of 1619, the arrival. And we were working on something what's called the Freedom Center, the National Center for Freedom is what we were working on. And part of this process was really about talking about freedom and the language around that and what does it mean to different people. I conducted a survey amongst community members with one question: what does freedom look like to you? Half of the folks could tell me. The other half, they couldn't. Guess what? There was a racial divide. All the white folks had a vision and an idea to what freedom was. None of the black folks could tell me what freedom was. And I remembered asking one of the elders, I said, beloved, help me understand. But what? And she said, it's hard for me to see something that I've never seen before. So we're talking about opportunity, we're talking about possibility, and to come back to Lamerchi and Ebony here, and a lot of that is framed by the words that we use. And I think it's just so difficult to communicate now, because if I said one word in here, it could mean 15 different things. And some of y'all might get mad and leave. And if you've been on Facebook, it's regular. Yeah. Right? And so I just think this is why everything for me just continues to come back to love. The moment for me was remembering what love is and what it isn't. I heard you over there. Thank you. No, you
There we go. That's unity, guys.
Let's thank this wonderful, wonderful panel again. And they have made my job, which should be a short, quick, 1-minute thing, very difficult, because a lot of the points you raised today, I was going to raise in my closing. And that's what I'm here to do today. Just thank them again. And I had a number of things, and I'll condense it into a few minutes, but I was thinking about the Black Heritage Trail of New Hampshire, and I just thought about their mission. The Black Heritage Trail of New Hampshire promotes awareness and appreciation of African American history and life in order to build more inclusive communities today. That's what's being done in these tea talks. That is specifically what was done today. So again, I just thank you for what we heard today. And for me, I heard some new stuff, but I heard some reminders. And I think about these tea talks as, discussions, and more than that, they're conversations. Sometimes the conversations have been uncomfortable in the past, and today too, a lot of what's mentioned was uncomfortable. But they always at some point turn out to be uplifting, and they're always interesting, enlightening, they give me pause to think about the things that I thought I knew and some of the new things that have been introduced. And then lastly, and especially in these times, they give me hope. So again, I thank you for that. Jerry Ann, in speaking about the 2025 Tea Talks, was quoted as having said, you know, this year's series is not only a reflection on history, but also a celebration of the resilience and ingenuity of African Americans. By drawing on ancient spiritual traditions and collective wisdom, African Americans created pathways for survival and progress. The conversations at the Tea Talks will allow us to understand our shared history and the ongoing fight for justice. So you've done that, and just to point out just very few of the points that I heard and that were particularly salient for me, I'll do that, but I also want to encourage everyone to go to the website. These videos are posted, you can look at it again, you can glean information, you can share it with others. I want to thank Lemershi for setting it up for me and reiterating for me and for us that the slave trade was just not a Southern aberration. The slave trade took place in the United States, which were not the United States then, but it was endemic in the building of the America we know. So thank you for reminding me of that. Ebony, what you said about the Black-owned press and speaking about a truth that cannot be ignored, that resonated with me. And it's told by us, for us. Without us, who would have told our stories? And the other thing you said, which is key, you said our erasure is their power. One, they can erase as much as they want, but as long as I stand here, and as long as others, such as myself, stand here, you included, we share these stories and we will not be erased. It may take a little longer, but we will not be erased. Okay? Richard, you said so many things, and when you set up the title, Wellness, Belonging, and Sustained Power of Protest, belonging, you said, and there is no standard way to do that. The other thing that you said to me, see, you only spoke to me. The other thing, which I heard reiterated, so other people got it too, was diversity, equity, and inclusion. Say those words. Yes. People don't know DEAI. Say them. The other thing, what kind of ancestor will you be? That should play, and that should play with love. Dr. Trent, when you started singing, I lost everything because that's what I was thinking. Keep your eyes on the prize. So thank you for doing that. Thank you for mentioning the Disneyfication of history and that we should not fall for that. Thank you again. This whole theme of the Tea Talks this year, and again, not again, but it made me think also, keep your eyes on the prize, and something that has been ascribed to Dr. Adam Clayton Powell. I think others have said it also, but what's in your hand? There may not be a lot, but we each have something we can do, something we can share, some movement forward we can make. So I encourage each of us to do that. Okay, now it's necessary for me to say some thank yous. So the sponsors of these Eleanor Williams Hooker Tea Talks, TCS of America, the Portsmouth Public Library, New Hampshire Center for Justice and Equity, Mass General Brigham Wentworth Douglas Hospital, Sheehan Finney, Manchester Historic Association, Warner Historical Society, the Spice and Tea Exchange, Kennebunk Savings, Shaheen Gordon Attorneys at Law, and this program was made possible by a grant from New Hampshire Humanities. I also want to reiterate and thank each of the volunteers who give their time and energy to make this program and other Black Heritage Trail of New Hampshire programs possible. Thank you. I want to thank those who participated in previous panels And again, if you've missed any of them, you can go to the Black Heritage Trail of New Hampshire website and view some of those. And then last, but certainly not least, to you. I call you our interested, involved, smart audience, without whom there would be no reason to do this, nor could we do this if you were not here participating. And that means all of you here in the room and all of you joining us virtually on Zoom, thank you so much. And in case you want a little more, there's the expanded Tea Talks this year. So beginning in September, we have two, September 7th in Manchester, New Hampshire, September 21st in Warner, New Hampshire. And thank you again for all you do to make the Black Heritage Trail of New Hampshire programs possible. Thank you.